The schoolhouse door slammed open with such force that Hannah Jameson's carefully arranged stack of primers tumbled to the floor, and she knew without looking that it would be another day of torment. It was October 1878 in Reno, Nevada, and the rough mining town had little patience for a 23-year-old schoolteacher from Boston who insisted on proper grammar and arithmetic. The children who bothered to attend her classes came more to escape chores than to learn, their parents dismissive of education when there was silver to be pulled from the mountains and cattle to be driven across the high desert plains. Hannah had arrived 6 months ago with such hope, her teaching certificate pressed carefully in her trunk alongside her few dresses, believing she could make a difference in this wild place. Instead, she had become a joke. "Miss Jameson's got her nose in a book again," Tommy Fletcher announced to the half-empty room, his voice carrying the mocking tone he had perfected. At 14, he was already taller than Hannah, with the swagger of someone who knew the town saloon better than his letters. Probably reading about fancy Boston folk who actually care about poetry. Hannah straightened her spine, smoothing her simple brown skirt with hands that wanted to tremble but would not. She had learned not to show weakness. "Good morning, Tommy. Please take your seat. We are beginning with geography today." "Geography," he drawled, flopping into a chair that groaned under his careless weight. "What's the point when I already know where the silver mines are? That's the only geography that matters." 3 other students snickered. Mary Carson, one of the few who genuinely tried, kept her eyes down. Hannah felt the familiar burn of frustration in her chest, but she moved to the battered slate board and began drawing a careful map of the United States, her chalk precise despite the tremor in her fingers. The door opened again, but this time there was no slam. Hannah glanced over her shoulder and froze. The man who ducked through the doorframe was unlike anyone she had seen in the schoolhouse before. He had to be well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the narrow doorway. His hair was dark brown and fell past his collar, tied back with a leather cord, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into sharp, handsome planes. He wore buckskin and homespun, and his arms beneath the rolled sleeves of his shirt were corded with muscle that spoke of a life spent in hard physical labor. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, and he carried himself with a quiet confidence that made everyone in the room go silent. "Madam," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to resonate in Hannah's bones. He removed his hat, revealing more of that thick, slightly wild hair. "I heard tell you teach reading and writing here. I would like to learn if you will have me." Hannah stared. Tommy Fletcher's mouth hung open. Even the younger children who had been whispering and fidgeting went completely still. Hannah began, then cleared her throat. "Of course, you are welcome here. Please find a seat." The problem was immediately apparent. The desks were built for children, rough pine benches with narrow tables attached. The man looked at them with a slight furrow between his dark brows, then moved to the back of the room where he folded his considerable frame onto a bench that looked like it might splinter under his weight at any moment. His knees barely fit under the small table. "I am Hannah Jameson," she said, finding her voice again. "May I know your name?" "Bridger Xerxes," he replied. "Most folks call me Bridger. I live up in the mountains, trap and hunt mostly. Never learned my letters as a boy, and I figured it was time I remedied that." Tommy Fletcher let out a snort that he quickly tried to disguise as a cough. The idea of a grown man, especially one as intimidating as Bridger Xerxes, sitting in a schoolroom must have struck him as absurd. But when Bridger's dark eyes turned to him, calm and steady, Tommy's amusement died instantly. Hannah felt something shift in her chest. Here was someone who wanted to learn, genuinely wanted to, and she was going to teach him if it was the last thing she did. "We will begin with the alphabet," she said, her voice stronger now. She turned back to the board and began writing the letters in her careful script, and for the first time in months, every single person in the room paid attention. The morning progressed in a way that Hannah had almost forgotten was possible. Bridger watched her with an intensity that was almost unnerving, his eyes tracking every movement of her hand, every word she spoke. When she handed out the slates for the students to practice their letters, he accepted his with a quiet "thank you" that held more genuine gratitude than she had heard in all her time in Reno. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who had lived rough, but he held the chalk with surprising delicacy. His first attempts at forming letters were shaky, the strokes uncertain, but he did not give up. While Tommy Fletcher scrawled lazy circles on his slate and whispered jokes to the boy next to him, Bridger worked with absolute focus. Hannah found herself drawn to his side of the room again and again. "Like this," she said softly, reaching over to guide his hand through the curve of a capital B. His hand was warm beneath hers, and she felt the calluses that spoke of rope and axe and rifle. "See how the letter has two curves stacked together?" "I see," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. His eyes met hers, and for a moment she forgot entirely where she was. They were the color of dark coffee, warm and deep, and they looked at her with a respect she had not seen since leaving Boston. She pulled her hand back quickly, her cheeks warming. "Practice that," she managed. "You are doing well." By the time she rang the bell for the midday break, her students scattered like startled birds, but Bridger remained, still working on his slate. Hannah busied herself tidying the books on her desk, acutely aware of his presence in the small room. "Miss Jameson," he said finally, and she turned. He had stood, unfolding from the too small desk, and she was struck again by his sheer size. In Boston, she had been considered tall for a woman, but he made her feel small in a way that was not entirely unpleasant. "I want to thank you. I know it must seem strange, a man my age coming to learn alongside children." "It does not seem strange at all," Hannah said firmly. "It seems brave. Education is valuable at any age, and I am honored to teach someone who truly wishes to learn." Something flickered across his face, an emotion she could not quite name. "The folks in town speak poorly of you," he said bluntly. "But I have been here only 2 hours, and I can see they are fools. You are a fine teacher, Miss Jameson." Hannah's throat tightened unexpectedly. She had endured 6 months of dismissal and mockery, had written letters home filled with forced cheerfulness while crying herself to sleep in her small boarding room, and this stranger's simple statement of respect nearly undid her completely. "Thank you," she whispered. "That means more than you know." He nodded once, a decisive movement. "I will be here every day you will have me. I have much to learn, and I suspect you have much to teach." He left then, ducking through the doorway and out into the bright Nevada sunshine. Hannah sank into her chair, her heart beating faster than it should. Through the window, she watched him stride down the dusty main street of Reno, his long hair catching the light, and she realized that something fundamental had just changed in her life. That afternoon, the students who returned were different. Tommy Fletcher was quieter, shooting uncertain glances at Bridger's empty seat. The younger children whispered among themselves, and Hannah caught the words "mountain man" and "huge" more than once. Even Mary Carson seemed energized, her hand shooting up to answer questions with new enthusiasm. Hannah taught with renewed vigor, her voice carrying clearly as she explained the principles of arithmetic. She found herself preparing for tomorrow, for Bridger's return, choosing lessons that would challenge him while remaining accessible to a beginner. She stayed late in the schoolhouse after dismissing the children, writing out careful examples in her lesson book, practicing how she would explain phonetics and simple words. Her landlady, Mrs. Patterson, a stern widow who ran the boarding house where Hannah rented a room, noticed her improved mood at dinner. "You seem livelier today, Miss Jameson," she commented, ladling stew onto Hannah's plate. "Something good happened at that schoolhouse." "I have a new student," Hannah said, trying to keep her voice casual. "A man who wants to learn to read and write." Mrs. Patterson's eyebrows rose. "A man? Who would that be?" "Bridger Xerxes. He said he lives in the mountains." "Ah, Mrs. Patterson set down the ladle with a considering expression. "The trapper. I have heard of him. Keeps to himself mostly, comes into town for supplies every few weeks. Some say he is dangerous, but I have never heard of him causing real trouble. Just a wild sort, I suppose, living up there alone." "He seems respectful," Hannah said quietly, "and genuinely interested in learning." "Well," Mrs. Patterson said, "perhaps he will set an example for those wild children. Heaven knows they need one." That night, Hannah lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. She kept seeing Bridger's face as he concentrated on forming his letters, the way his brow furrowed with effort, the quiet determination in every line of his body. She had come to Reno believing she could make a difference through teaching, but she had not expected someone like him to walk through her door. She had not expected to feel this flutter of anticipation about tomorrow. The next morning, Hannah arrived at the schoolhouse early. She swept the floors until they were spotless, arranged the books with perfect precision, and wrote the day's lessons on the board in her most careful script. When the door opened and Bridger ducked inside, she had to force herself not to smile too widely. "Good morning, Mr. Xerxes," she said formally, though her heart was beating fast. "Madam," he replied, and there was the hint of warmth in his eyes. "I practiced last night. The letters you showed me. May I see?" He pulled a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket and handed it to her. The paper was rough, probably traded for at the general store, and the letters were drawn in pencil rather than chalk. They were uneven and sometimes backwards, but they filled the entire page, rows and rows of careful attempts. Hannah looked up at him, genuinely moved. "This is excellent work. You must have spent hours on this." "I have the time," he said simply. "And I figure if something is worth doing, it is worth doing thoroughly." The other students began trickling in, and Hannah tucked Bridger's practice page carefully into her lesson book before calling the class to order. Today she focused on phonetics, on the sounds that letters made and how they combined to form words. Bridger absorbed everything with that same intense focus, while Tommy Fletcher slouched and yawned. "Tommy," Hannah said sharply when she caught him flicking bits of eraser at the boy in front of him, "if you are not interested in learning, you are welcome to leave and explain to your father why you wasted the morning." Tommy's father ran the livery stable and had strong opinions about education, none of them favorable. But he also believed in discipline, and the threat made Tommy sit up straighter. "Sorry, Miss Jameson," he muttered. From the back of the room, Bridger spoke up for the first time. "When I was your age," he said to Tommy, his voice quiet but carrying easily, "I thought I knew everything. Thought reading was for soft city folk, not for someone who could hunt and trap and live off the land. Now I am 28 years old, and I am sitting in this schoolroom wishing I had learned back then. You have an opportunity here that you do not recognize. Do not waste it." Tommy stared at him, and something in Bridger's calm certainty seemed to reach him where Hannah's frustration never had. He picked up his slate without another word of complaint. Hannah felt a rush of gratitude so strong it nearly took her breath away. She met Bridger's eyes and saw understanding there, a recognition that passed between them without need for words. The days began to form a pattern. Bridger came to the schoolhouse every morning just as the sun cleared the eastern mountains, and he stayed until Hannah dismissed the afternoon lessons. He never missed a day, even when autumn storms rolled down from the Sierras and turned the streets of Reno into rivers of mud. He would arrive with his boots carefully scraped clean, his hair damp from rain, and settle into his too small desk with the same quiet determination. Hannah taught him alongside the children, but she found herself creating extra lessons just for him, materials that would challenge his growing skills without boring the younger students. She lent him books from her own small collection, simple stories at first, and watched his face light up with wonder when he successfully read his first complete sentence. "I did it," he said, looking up from the page with an expression of such pure joy that Hannah felt her chest tighten. "I just read that whole sentence without your help." "You did," she confirmed, smiling. "You are progressing remarkably quickly, Mr. Xerxes." "Bridger," he said. "Please, just Bridger. We have been sitting in the same schoolroom for 3 weeks now. I think we can dispense with the formalities." "Bridger," she repeated, and liked the way his name felt in her mouth. "Then you must call me Hannah, at least outside of school hours." Something shifted between them in that moment, a small intimacy acknowledged. They were not just teacher and student anymore, if they ever had been. They were something else, something that had no clear definition yet, but felt important nonetheless. November arrived, and with it the first real cold. Hannah began building a fire in the schoolhouse's pot-bellied stove each morning, and Bridger started arriving even earlier to help her carry wood and kindling. They developed an easy routine, working together in comfortable silence as the sun rose and painted the Nevada sky in shades of gold and pink. "You do not have to do this," Hannah said one morning as Bridger stacked firewood neatly beside the stove. "Helping with chores is not part of your lessons." "I know," he replied. "I want to." He straightened, and they were standing close in the small space, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his dark eyes, could smell the scent of pine and wood smoke that clung to his clothes. She should step back, should maintain proper distance, but she found herself unable to move. "Hannah," he said, his voice low, and she realized it was the first time he had used her given name. "I need to tell you something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "Yes. I did not come to your schoolhouse just to learn reading and writing. I mean, I do want to learn that genuinely. But I also came because I heard how the town treated you, how they mocked you and disrespected you, and I thought that was shameful. I thought perhaps if I took your teaching seriously, others might follow." Hannah stared at him, a complex tangle of emotions swirling through her chest. "You came to defend me." "I came because you deserve respect," he said firmly. "Because what you do matters, even if this rough town does not see it. And I stayed because you are the finest teacher I could imagine, and because—" He paused, seeming to gather courage. "Because I look forward to seeing you every morning more than I have looked forward to anything in a very long time." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Hannah knew she should be cautious, should remember her position and reputation. But when she looked at Bridger, at this strong, gentle man who had walked into her classroom and changed everything, caution seemed like a distant concern. "I look forward to seeing you too," she whispered. The sound of children's voices outside broke the moment. Bridger stepped back smoothly, his expression shifting into something more neutral, though his eyes still held warmth. Hannah turned to the board and began writing the day's lessons with hands that trembled slightly, aware of him moving to his seat, aware of everything about him in a way that made concentration difficult. That day, she taught through a haze of distraction, her mind constantly returning to their conversation by the stove. When she looked at Bridger, she sometimes found him already watching her, and each time their eyes met, she felt a jolt that went straight through her center. After dismissing the students that afternoon, she stayed at her desk, pretending to grade papers that did not need grading. Bridger remained as well, working on a reading passage she had assigned him. The silence stretched between them, full of things unsaid. Finally, Bridger closed his book. "Hannah, may I walk you back to your boarding house?" It was a simple request, but it felt monumental. "Yes," she said. "I would like that." They left the schoolhouse together, stepping out into the crisp November air. The sun was lowering toward the mountains, painting everything in amber light. Reno's main street bustled with afternoon activity. Miners heading to the saloons, merchants closing their shops, women gathering their purchases. Hannah was acutely conscious of the looks they drew, the mountain man and the schoolteacher walking side by side. "You mind?" she asked quietly. "People staring at us." Bridger glanced down at her. "I have never minded what people think of me. Living alone in the mountains teaches you that most opinions do not matter, but I would not want to damage your reputation." "My reputation here was already poor," Hannah said with a slight smile. "What more damage can be done? You say that now, but there is a difference between being disrespected as a teacher and being gossiped about for stepping out with a man." The phrase "stepping out" made her pulse quicken. "Is that what we are doing? Stepping out?" They had reached Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, but Bridger did not move toward the door. Instead, he turned to face her fully, his expression serious. "I would like it to be, if you would, but I need you to understand what you would be choosing. I am not a town man, Hannah. I live rough, up in the mountains in a cabin I built with my own hands. I come to Reno for supplies and not much else. I do not have fine clothes or money in the bank. What I have is that cabin, my traps, my rifle, and my word. That is all I can offer." Hannah looked up at him, at this man who had shown her more respect in a few weeks than the entire town had in 6 months, who had sat humbly in a schoolroom to learn because he valued knowledge, who had walked into her life and made her feel seen again. "I do not need fine clothes or money," she said. "I came to Nevada to make a difference, to teach, and I have found mostly disappointment, except for you. You have reminded me why I became a teacher in the first place. So yes, Bridger Xerxes, I would very much like to step out with you." The smile that spread across his face transformed him, softening all those hard edges and making him look younger, lighter. "Then may I call on you Sunday? I could borrow a wagon, take you out to see the mountains properly." "I would love that." He tipped his hat to her, a gesture that seemed almost formal after their honest conversation, and she watched him stride away down the street before finally going inside. Mrs. Patterson was waiting in the parlor, her eyes sharp with curiosity. "That was quite the escort home, Miss Jameson." "Mr. Xerxes was kind enough to walk with me," Hannah said, trying to sound casual. "Kind enough," Mrs. Patterson repeated. "Well, he is a decent man from what I hear, if unconventional. Just be careful, dear. Mountain men are not like city gentlemen." "I know," Hannah said. "That is what I like about him." Sunday arrived bright and cold. Hannah dressed in her best day dress, a deep green wool that brought out the color of her eyes and twisted her auburn hair into a careful bun. She felt nervous in a way she had not since her first day of teaching, her stomach full of fluttering anticipation. Bridger arrived precisely when he said he would, driving a borrowed wagon that looked recently cleaned. He had clearly made an effort as well. His hair was neatly tied back, his clothes were clean, and he wore a jacket that, while made of rough homespun, fit his broad shoulders well. "You look beautiful," he said when she emerged from the boarding house, and the simple sincerity in his voice made her blush. "Thank you. You look very handsome." He helped her up into the wagon with a hand that was gentle despite its strength, and they set off toward the mountains that ringed Reno to the west. The day was perfect, the sky a brilliant blue with only a few high clouds, and the air smelled of sage and snow from the higher elevations. As they left town behind, Bridger began to relax, his shoulders losing some of their tension. "I am not comfortable in Reno," he admitted. "Too many people, too much noise. The mountains are where I belong." "Tell me about your cabin," Hannah prompted. "You said you built it yourself." His face lit up, and he launched into a description of his home in the high country, a sturdy structure of pine logs with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over a valley where deer came to graze at dawn. He described the creek that ran nearby, cold and clear, and the stands of aspen that turned gold in autumn. As he talked, Hannah found herself enchanted not just by the description, but by the obvious love he had for this place. "It sounds beautiful," she said wistfully. "I've barely seen anything beyond Reno since I arrived, just the dusty streets and the schoolhouse." "Then let me show you," Bridger said, and guided the wagon off the main road onto a rough track that climbed into the foothills. The landscape transformed around them as they ascended. The scrubby desert plants gave way to pine and juniper, and the air grew sharper, cleaner. Bridger pointed out landmarks and wildlife signs with the easy knowledge of someone who truly understood this land. When they reached a high overlook, he stopped the wagon and helped her down. The view took Hannah's breath away. Below them, the valley spread out in a patchwork of colors, the silver thread of the Truckee River, the clustered buildings of Reno looking small and insignificant, and beyond that the vast Nevada desert stretching to distant mountains. Above them rose the Sierra Nevada, their peaks already white with snow. "This is incredible," she breathed. "I hoped you would think so." Bridger stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "Most people in town think I am strange for preferring the mountains to civilization. But out here, everything makes sense. There are no false pretenses in nature, no judgment, just survival and beauty in equal measure." Hannah turned to look at him. "I do not think you are strange at all. I think you are honest in a way most people are not. You know what matters to you, and you live according to that knowledge." "You do the same," he said, meeting her eyes. "You came all the way from Boston to teach in a rough mining town, and even when they treated you poorly, you did not give up. That takes courage." "Sometimes I wanted to give up," she admitted. "There were nights when I almost packed my trunk and bought a ticket back east." "What stopped you?" She considered the question. "Pride, partly. I did not want to admit defeat, but also hope. I kept thinking that surely it would get better, that eventually someone would value what I was trying to do." She smiled at him. "And then you walked through my door." Bridger reached out slowly, giving her time to move away if she wished, and tucked a strand of hair that had escaped her bun behind her ear. His fingers were warm against her cheek despite the cool air. "I am glad I did," he said softly. They stood there on the overlook, the Nevada wind swirling around them, and Hannah felt something settle into place in her heart. This was what she had been missing, not just in Reno but in all her years in Boston preparing to be a teacher. This connection, this sense of being truly seen and valued by another person. Bridger unpacked a lunch he had brought, simple fare of bread and cheese and apples. But they ate sitting on a sun-warmed rock, and it tasted better than any fancy meal Hannah could remember. They talked easily, discovering shared opinions on books once Bridger admitted which titles he remembered from his childhood, comparing their different upbringings, finding points of connection despite their vastly different backgrounds. "My parents died when I was young," Bridger told her, staring out at the mountains. "Fever took them both within a week. I was 10 years old and there was no one to take me in, so I learned to survive on my own. An old trapper named Gideon found me half-starved in the woods and taught me his trade. He could not read either, so he never thought to teach me. When he died 5 years ago, I took over his cabin and his trap lines. It has been a solitary life, but a good one. That must have been so difficult, Hannah said, her heart aching for the boy he had been. Being alone so young. It made me strong, he said, but also lonely. I did not realize how lonely until recently, until I met someone who made me want something more than just surviving. The meaning was clear, and Hannah's breath caught. Bridger. He turned to her, and the intensity in his eyes was almost overwhelming. I know we have not known each other long, and I know I should probably court you properly for months before saying anything. But I am not good at pretending, Hannah. These past weeks, sitting in your classroom, learning from you, watching the way you care about teaching even when no one appreciates it. You are the finest person I have ever met, and I am falling in love with you. The words hung in the clear mountain air, honest and vulnerable. Hannah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were good tears, joyful tears. I am falling in love with you too, she whispered. You make me feel valued in a way I never have before. When you look at me, I feel like I matter, like what I do has meaning. And you are so much more than you give yourself credit for. You are kind and determined and brave, and I think I started falling in love with you the moment you walked into my schoolhouse asking to learn. Bridger let out a breath that sounded almost like relief. Then, moving with careful deliberation, he cupped her face in his large, calloused hands and kissed her. It was Hannah's first kiss, and it was everything she had read about in novels, but more real, more immediate. His lips were warm and surprisingly gentle, and when she leaned into him, he made a soft sound of contentment that reverberated through her entire body. His arms came around her, strong and secure, and for a moment the whole world narrowed to just the two of them on that mountainside. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing harder, Bridger rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that for weeks, he admitted. So have I, Hannah said, then laughed at her own boldness. Though I barely admitted it to myself. They lingered on the mountain as long as they could, but eventually the lowering sun forced them to return to town. The ride back seemed too short, even though Hannah was pressed against Bridger's side, his arm around her shoulders to keep her warm as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. At the boarding house, he helped her down from the wagon and held her hands in his. May I see you again tomorrow, after school? Yes, she said immediately. Yes, always yes. He kissed her once more, quickly because Mrs. Patterson was visible in the parlor window, and then drove away. Hannah floated into the boarding house, her cheeks flushed from cold and happiness, and barely noticed Mrs. Patterson's knowing smile. The next weeks were the happiest of Hannah's life. Bridger continued attending her classes each day, and though they maintained a proper distance during school hours, afterward they would walk together through Reno or sit in the schoolhouse talking until the light faded. He progressed rapidly in his reading and writing, his determination and natural intelligence overcoming his late start. By December, he was reading full books and writing short passages with increasing confidence. The town began to notice their relationship, and the reactions were mixed. Some found it romantic, the mountain man and the schoolteacher. Others whispered that Hannah was foolish to attach herself to someone so rough and uncivilized, but Hannah found that she did not care about the gossip. Bridger had taught her something important, that the opinions of small-minded people did not define her worth. The students' attitudes had shifted as well. Bridger's presence and example had changed the dynamic in the classroom. Tommy Fletcher actually completed his assignments now, and several other students who had been dismissive before began trying harder. When they saw a grown man working diligently to learn his letters, Their own resistance seemed childish in comparison. "You have transformed that classroom, Mrs. Patterson observed one evening at dinner. "I hear talk that more families are considering sending their children now. People are starting to respect your teaching." "It is because of Bridger," Hannah said. "He gave me credibility simply by taking me seriously." "Perhaps, Mrs. Patterson said thoughtfully. "But do not discount your own abilities, dear. You were always a good teacher. You just needed someone to see it first." Winter settled over Reno, bringing cold winds and occasional snow. The schoolhouse became harder to heat, and Hannah often arrived to find frost on the inside of the windows. But Bridger was always there early, building up the fire until the room was warm, and that made everything bearable. 2 days before Christmas, Bridger asked her to take another ride with him. This time, instead of heading to the overlook, he drove further into the mountains, following trails that seemed barely visible to Hannah's eyes. She trusted him completely, wrapped in a thick blanket he had brought, content to be in his presence. After an hour of steady climbing, they emerged into a clearing, and Hannah gasped. There stood a log cabin, smoke rising from its stone chimney, windows glowing with warm light. It was exactly as Bridger had described it, solid and beautifully crafted, nestled against the mountainside with a view over a small valley. "This is your home," she said wonderingly. "This is my home," he confirmed. "I wanted you to see it, to understand what I am offering when I say I want a life with you." He helped her down and led her inside. The cabin was a single large room with a sleeping loft visible above, but it was meticulously kept. The furniture was simple but well made, clearly crafted by Bridger's own hands. Furs and woven blankets added warmth and color. Books that Hannah had lent him were stacked carefully on a shelf near the stone fireplace. It was a home, not just a shelter, and Hannah could feel the care Bridger had put into creating this space. "It is wonderful," she said honestly. "I can feel you in every corner of this place." Bridger looked relieved. "I know it is not what you are used to. No fancy furniture or servants or even neighbors close by. In winter, we can get snowed in for days at a time. It is a hard life in many ways." "But it is an honest life," Hannah said, moving to stand in front of him. "And it is your life, which means it is precious to me." He pulled her close, and they stood in the center of his cabin with the fire crackling and the mountain silence surrounding them. "Marry me," he said, not quite a question. "I know I should probably court you longer, do things properly, but I know my own heart, Hannah. I want you as my wife. I want to come home to you every evening, wake up beside you every morning. I want to keep learning from you, keep growing with you. Marry me and make this our home." Hannah's heart felt so full she thought it might burst. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you, Bridger. I love your honesty and your strength and your gentle heart. I love that you value learning, that you respect what I do. Yes, absolutely yes." He kissed her deeply, and this time there was no need for restraint. They were alone in his cabin, engaged to be married, and Hannah poured all her love and hope into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, both flushed and breathing hard, Bridger pulled something from his pocket. It was a ring, simple but beautiful, carved from what looked like elk antler and inlaid with a delicate silver pattern. "I made it for you," he said. "I am not a jeweler, but I wanted you to have something from my hands, something that represents what I can give you." Hannah's eyes filled with tears as he slipped it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the smooth antler warm against her skin. "It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she whispered. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the cabin, planning their future. Bridger explained that trapping season was in full swing, but he could still come to town several times a week for lessons and to see her. After they married, she could continue teaching if she wished, though the journey from the cabin to Reno would take over an hour each way. "I want to keep teaching," Hannah said firmly. "At least for now. Those children have started to believe in education, and I cannot abandon them. But perhaps eventually, when we have children of our own, I will teach from home." The thought of children made them both fall silent, imagining a future that seemed almost too wonderful to believe. Bridger showed her the rest of his property, the small barn where he kept his horse and supplies, the creek that he had spoken of, frozen now into a ribbon of ice. The afternoon light was gold on the snow, and everything felt magical, like they existed in a world separate from ordinary concerns. On the ride back to Reno, Hannah leaned against Bridger's solid warmth and felt completely at peace. She had come to Nevada hoping to make a difference through teaching, and she had found so much more. She had found love, partnership, respect, and a future that excited her even as it meant leaving behind everything familiar. They announced their engagement on Christmas Day, and the town's reaction was everything from delighted to scandalized. Mrs. Patterson declared herself unsurprised but pleased, and even helped Hannah begin planning a simple wedding. Some of the families whose children attended the school offered congratulations, while others muttered about proper courtship periods and the unsuitability of a mountain man for a Boston-educated teacher. Hannah found that she truly did not care about the negative opinions. She had Bridger, who loved her completely. She had her students, who were finally learning and growing, and she had a future stretching before her full of possibility. They decided to marry in February, giving Hannah time to prepare and Bridger time to finish the most intensive part of trapping season. During those weeks of engagement, they saw each other as often as possible. Bridger continued attending school, now openly sitting beside Hannah at her desk during the lunch period, helping younger students with their reading while she worked with the older ones on more advanced material. The dynamic between them had evolved. They were still teacher and student in some ways, but they were also partners, equals who respected each other's strengths. Bridger's reading had progressed to the point where he could tackle complex material, and Hannah found herself learning from him as well, absorbing his knowledge of the land and wildlife, of survival and self-sufficiency. "You should write these things down," she told him one afternoon as he described tracking a mountain lion through fresh snow. "Your observations, your experiences, they are valuable knowledge that should be preserved. Write them." He looked surprised. "I never thought of myself as a writer." "Why not? You can write now, and you have stories worth telling. Not everything valuable is taught in schoolhouses, Bridger. Your knowledge is just as important as anything in my books." The idea clearly intrigued him. Over the following weeks, Hannah would find him bent over his slate during quiet moments, carefully forming words into sentences, capturing his thoughts on paper. Watching him embrace this new aspect of literacy filled her with pride and love. February arrived with a fresh snowfall that blanketed Reno in white. The wedding was set for February 14th, Valentine's Day, which seemed fitting. Hannah had written to her family in Boston, and though they responded with concern about her marrying someone they had never met, they ultimately sent their blessing and a small amount of money to help with the wedding costs. Mrs. Patterson and several of the mothers from school helped Hannah prepare. Her wedding dress was simple, made from cream-colored wool with modest lace trim, practical for the cold weather and suitable for a small-town wedding. She would wear her auburn hair down, as Bridger had shyly admitted he loved seeing it loose. The night before the wedding, Hannah lay awake in her narrow boarding house bed for the last time, thinking about how much her life had changed in less than 6 months. She had gone from being a disrespected, lonely teacher to being a woman deeply in love, valued by her students, and about to embark on an entirely new life. The girl who had left Boston seemed like a stranger now, and Hannah found she did not miss her. The wedding took place in the small church at the edge of town, with Reverend Matthews officiating. Despite the short notice and simple nature of the ceremony, a surprising number of people attended. Most of Hannah's students came with their families, and various townspeople who had warmed to her over the past months filled the pews. Even some of Bridger's fellow trappers and mountain men made the journey down from the high country. Rough-looking men who nonetheless cleaned up respectably and offered genuine good wishes. Hannah walked down the short aisle alone, having no father present to give her away, but she did not feel the lack. Her eyes were locked on Bridger, who stood at the front of the church looking almost overwhelmed. He wore new clothes, dark trousers, and a jacket that emphasized his broad shoulders, his long hair neatly tied back. When she reached him and he took her hands, she saw moisture glinting in his dark eyes. "You are so beautiful," he whispered, just for her. The ceremony was simple and brief. They spoke traditional vows, their voices steady and sure. When Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, Bridger's kiss was gentle and reverent, a promise of all the kisses to come. The town had organized a modest reception at the church hall, with food and drink donated by various families. Hannah was surprised and touched by the outpouring of support. Tommy Fletcher's mother pressed a beautifully quilted blanket into her hands. Mary Carson's father, a carpenter, gifted them a rocking chair he had made. Even people who had previously dismissed Hannah's teaching offered small tokens and congratulations. "You have won them over," Mrs. Patterson said, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "They see now what you always were, a dedicated teacher and a good woman. That mountain man of yours helped them see it." "He is my husband now," Hannah said, trying out the words and finding them perfect. "My husband." As the afternoon waned, Bridger approached her with barely contained eagerness. "Are you ready to go home? Home. Not the boarding house, but the cabin in the mountains." "Yes," Hannah said. "I am ready." They had already loaded Hannah's possessions into a wagon, her trunk of books and clothes, her few personal items. It was not much to show for 23 years of life, but it felt like enough. Bridger helped her up onto the wagon seat, and they drove away from Reno to waves and shouts of congratulations. The journey to the cabin took on new meaning this time. Hannah was not visiting now, she was coming home. The winter sunset painted the snow-covered mountains in shades of pink and gold as they climbed higher, and when the cabin came into view, smoke already rising from its chimney thanks to preparations Bridger had made earlier, Hannah felt a swell of emotion. "Welcome home, Mrs. Xerxes," Bridger said, and the name sent a thrill through her. He carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made them both laugh, and then they were alone together in the warm cabin, husband and wife, with the whole night stretching before them. The next hours were private and precious, filled with tenderness and discovery. Two people learning each other in the most intimate way possible. Hannah had been nervous about her wedding night, having only vague knowledge gained from whispered conversations with married friends, but Bridger was patient and gentle, and the experience became something beautiful rather than frightening. Afterward, they lay together in the bed in the cabin's loft, wrapped in quilts in each other's arms, and talked quietly about their future. "I will need to go check my trap lines tomorrow," Bridger said, stroking her hair. "But I do not want to leave you alone your first full day here." "I will be fine," Hannah assured him. "I want to explore our home properly, put away my things, maybe start planning lessons for when school resumes next week." "About school," Bridger said carefully. "Are you certain you want to continue? The journey is long, especially in winter. I would not have you exhaust yourself for a town that took so long to appreciate you." Hannah considered this. "I think I need to finish the school year at least. Those children are learning now, truly learning, and I cannot abandon them midway. But perhaps after summer, we can discuss other options. Maybe I could teach here, start a small school for mountain families. I know there are children scattered through these hills who never get any education." "That is a fine idea," Bridger said, sounding pleased. "You could make a real difference that way, and I could help build a proper schoolhouse near here if needed." They drifted to sleep planning and dreaming, and Hannah had never felt more content. The next months established a rhythm to their married life. Bridger would drive Hannah to Reno 3 days a week for school, then spend his time in town gathering supplies and handling business before collecting her in the afternoon. The other days, Hannah worked from the cabin, preparing lessons, reading, and gradually making the space more fully theirs. She added curtains to the windows, arranged her books on the shelves alongside Bridger's growing collection, and began planning a garden for spring. Bridger's education continued even without formal schooling. He read voraciously now, everything Hannah had brought and anything else he could acquire. In the evenings, they would read together by firelight, discussing what they learned. Bridger began writing down his knowledge of the mountains and wildlife as Hannah had suggested, filling pages with careful script that grew more confident with each passing week. "You are a better writer than you think," Hannah told him, reading through one of his pieces about tracking elk in winter. "This is clear and informative and genuinely interesting. You should consider trying to publish some of these observations." Newspapers and journals would be interested in authentic accounts of mountain life. "You really think so?" Bridger looked both pleased and skeptical. "I absolutely do. Your perspective is unique and valuable. Spring came to the mountains in a rush of snowmelt and wildflowers." Hannah discovered she loved the isolation that she once might have feared. The cabin felt cozy rather than confining, and she found unexpected joy in the simple domestic tasks of cooking and maintaining their home. She had thought teaching would always be her primary identity, but being Bridger's wife, building this life together, fulfilled her in ways she had not anticipated. In April, she realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mix of emotions: joy, excitement, and some fear. She told Bridger one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the valley gold and crimson. "I am going to have a baby," she said simply. "Sometime in late autumn, I think." Bridger's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: shock, wonder, fierce protectiveness, and finally pure joy. He pulled her into his arms carefully, as if she had suddenly become fragile. "A baby," he repeated, his voice rough. "Our child." "Hannah, that is the best news I could imagine." "I am a little frightened," she admitted. "The nearest doctor is in Reno, over an hour away, and I know mountain winters can be harsh." "We will prepare thoroughly," Bridger promised. "I will make sure we have everything you and the baby could need. And if necessary, we can stay in town for a few weeks around your time. I will not let anything happen to either of you." His certainty soothed her fears. Over the following weeks, they prepared for this new addition to their family. Bridger built a cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until there were no rough edges, and Hannah began sewing tiny clothes from soft fabric. She continued teaching through the end of the school year in May, and the students were delighted when she announced she would not be returning in the fall due to the coming baby. "But Miss Jameson, who will teach us?" Mary Carson asked, her face distressed. "Mrs. Xerxes now," Hannah corrected gently. "And Reno will find another teacher, I am sure. But I want you all to remember what we learned this year, that education matters. That knowledge is valuable, that you are all capable of more than you imagined. Promise me you will keep learning, keep reading, keep growing." They promised, and on her last day, the students and their families presented her with a beautiful quilt made by the mothers, each square representing a different family. Hannah cried openly as she accepted it, realizing how far she had come from the disrespected teacher of a year ago. Summer in the mountains was glorious. Hannah's belly grew round as she and Bridger worked together to prepare their home for 3. He taught her more about mountain life, how to identify edible plants, how to fish in the cold creek, how to read the weather in the shape of clouds. She taught him more advanced reading and writing, and was proud when he successfully submitted an article about mountain wildlife to a San Francisco newspaper and received payment for it. "I am a published writer," he said in amazement, holding the newspaper that contained his piece. "Because you believed I could be. Because you had something worth saying and the skill to say it well," Hannah corrected. "I just helped you see that in yourself." They made love frequently and tenderly, Bridger always careful of her changing body, and Hannah felt more beautiful in her pregnancy than she ever had before. The way Bridger looked at her, touched her swelling belly with reverent hands, made her feel like the most precious thing in his world. In September, as the aspens began turning gold, Hannah felt the first pangs of labor. Bridger had already arranged for the midwife from Reno to stay with them for the final weeks, an experienced older woman named Mrs. Chen, who had delivered dozens of babies. She took charge immediately, sending Bridger to fetch water and build up the fire, keeping Hannah calm as the contractions intensified. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. There were moments when Hannah felt she could not continue when the pain was too much, but Bridger stayed by her side every moment he was allowed, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool water, telling her she was strong and brave and he loved her. Finally, as the second sunset began painting the cabin windows gold, their baby was born. A boy, healthy and loud with a shock of dark hair and his father's strong features already evident in his tiny face. "A son," Bridger said, his voice breaking as Mrs. Chen placed the infant in his arms. "We have a son, Hannah." Hannah, exhausted and elated, watched her husband hold their newborn with infinite gentleness, this strong mountain man cradling the tiny life they had created together, and felt her heart expand beyond what she thought possible. They named him Benjamin, meaning son of my right hand, and gave him the middle name Oliver, after Hannah's father who had died when she was young. Benjamin Oliver Xerxes, born September 23, 1879, in a cabin in the mountains above Reno, Nevada. The first weeks with a newborn were challenging but magical. Hannah was grateful for her mother instincts and Mrs. Chen's guidance during the first few days. Bridger was surprisingly natural with Benjamin, changing him and rocking him and singing old trapping songs in his deep voice that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. "You are a wonderful father," Hannah told him one night as she watched him walk the floor with Benjamin over his shoulder, gently patting the baby's back. "I did not think I would be," Bridger admitted. "I had no father of my own to model after, but holding him, caring for him, it feels right. Like this is what I was meant to do all along." As autumn deepened toward winter, they settled into their new reality as a family of 3. Hannah felt no regret about leaving teaching, though she missed her students sometimes. This was different work, but no less important. Raising their son, maintaining their home, supporting Bridger in his writing and trapping. She found fulfillment in the quiet rhythms of mountain life. When Benjamin was 3 months old and winter had closed in around them in earnest, Hannah bundled him warmly, and they made the journey to Reno for supplies and to visit friends. The town's reaction to Benjamin was warm and enthusiastic. Mrs. Patterson cooed over him, and Hannah's former students pressed close to see the baby, marveling that their teacher was now a mother. "You look happy," Mrs. Patterson observed, bouncing Benjamin gently. "Happier than I ever saw you when you were teaching here." "I am happy," Hannah confirmed. "I loved teaching, but this life with Bridger and Benjamin is what I was meant for. Everything I experienced before led me to this." They spent the night in town at Mrs. Patterson's invitation, and Hannah was grateful for the ease of having help with Benjamin. But she found herself eager to return to the cabin the next day, to the peace and quiet of their mountain home. Reno felt loud and crowded now, and she understood more fully how Bridger must have always felt. The winter was long but not lonely. They had each other, and Benjamin grew rapidly, becoming more alert and interactive. Bridger continued his writing, now working on a longer manuscript about his years as a trapper. Hannah edited his work and marveled at his natural talent for description and narrative. On clear days, they bundled Benjamin up and took short walks in the snow, showing him the winter beauty of their world. Spring returned, and with it new growth and possibilities. Bridger's manuscript was complete, and they sent it to a publisher in San Francisco who had expressed interest after reading his newspaper articles. Benjamin began teething and trying to crawl, transforming from helpless infant to curious baby. Hannah felt her body recovering from pregnancy and birth, growing strong again. In May, word came that the publisher wanted to print Bridger's book. The advance payment was modest but meaningful, and the idea that his words would be read by people across the country filled Bridger with pride and astonishment. "None of this would have happened without you," he told Hannah as they celebrated with a special dinner. "You taught me to read and write. You encouraged me to record my knowledge. You edited my rough work into something publishable. You changed my entire life, Hannah." "You changed mine just as much," she replied. "I was drowning in Reno, failing and alone, and you gave me respect and love in this beautiful life." We saved each other, Bridger. That summer, they received a letter from the school board in Reno. They were looking for a new teacher, as the one they had hired after Hannah left had proven unsatisfactory. Would Mrs. Xerxes consider returning, perhaps part-time? Hannah and Bridger discussed the offer carefully. She missed teaching, but Benjamin was still so young, and the journey to town was difficult with an infant. In the end, they devised a compromise. Hannah would offer lessons at the cabin once a week for mountain families who wanted education for their children. It would be a small school, informal and practical, but it would allow her to teach while staying close to home. The plan worked beautifully. Word spread through the scattered mountain community, and by September, 6 children were coming to the cabin each Wednesday for lessons. Hannah taught them reading, writing, and arithmetic, but also practical skills suited to mountain life. Bridger would often join them, teaching tracking and wilderness survival alongside Hannah's more traditional curriculum. The children loved learning in the cabin, and their parents appreciated having education accessible without the long journey to Reno. Hannah felt fulfilled in a new way, teaching these eager students while Benjamin played nearby under Bridger's watchful eye. Benjamin grew into a sturdy, happy toddler with his father's dark eyes and his mother's quick mind. He learned to walk holding onto Bridger's fingers, taking his first steps across the cabin floor while both parents cheered. His first word was "da," which delighted Bridger endlessly, followed shortly by "ma," and then a rapidly expanding vocabulary. When Benjamin was 2, Hannah discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was met with calm happiness rather than fear. They knew what to expect now, were prepared and confident. In the summer of 1882, their second child was born, a daughter they named Hope Elizabeth, because hope was what had brought Hannah to Nevada, and love was what had kept her there. Hope had Hannah's auburn hair and a temperament that was somehow both fierce and gentle. Benjamin was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her, and watching Bridger with both children made Hannah fall in love with him all over again. Their life continued to evolve and grow. Bridger's book sold well enough that he was asked to write another, and he began working on a guide to mountain survival that would combine practical information with personal narratives. Hannah's small mountain school expanded to 12 students, and she was approached by families from even more remote areas asking if she could provide educational materials they could use at home. She began writing simple lesson plans and copying them out for distribution, creating a kind of informal correspondence school. The years passed in a blur of seasons and milestones. Benjamin started helping Bridger with simple trapping tasks, learning the skills his father had mastered. Hope proved to be a quick learner who loved books as much as her mother. In 1885, a third child arrived, another boy they named Samuel James, who had Bridger's easy strength and Hannah's patient determination. By 1888, 10 years after that November day when Bridger had first walked into Hannah's schoolhouse in Reno, they had created a life neither could have imagined. Their cabin had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, with additional rooms and a proper schoolroom where Hannah taught. Bridger had published 3 books and was considered an expert on mountain ecology and wildlife. Their children were healthy and bright, growing up with an education that combined book learning and practical wilderness skills. On a November evening much like that first one, Hannah and Bridger sat on their porch watching the sunset while their children played in the meadow below, their laughter ringing clear in the mountain air. Hannah leaned against her husband's solid warmth, feeling his arm come around her shoulders, and reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them here. "You ever regret it?" Bridger asked quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Leaving teaching in town, choosing this remote life?" "Never," Hannah said firmly. "Not for a single moment. I thought I came to Nevada to be a teacher, but really I came to find you to build this life. Everything I hoped to accomplish through teaching in Reno, I have done here in ways I never expected. Our children are learning, the mountain children are learning, and you learned everything I had to teach and then taught me so much in return. You were the teacher no one respected," Bridger said, "until I sat in your class and learned everything you had to teach. But the truth is, we taught each other. You showed me the value of knowledge and education. I showed you that there were different ways to live, different things to value. Together we created something neither of us could have built alone." Hannah turned to kiss him, a kiss that still held the same sweetness as that first one on the mountain overlooked so many years ago. "I love you," she said simply. "I loved you then, and I love you now, and I will love you always." "Always," Bridger agreed, and they sat together as the stars began to emerge above the mountains, surrounded by the life they had built, the children they had raised, and the love that had transformed them both. Benjamin came running up from the meadow, Hope and Samuel close behind, full of breathless news about a deer they had spotted near the creek. Bridger stood to go investigate with them, and Hannah followed, her family around her, the mountain sunset painting everything gold. She had been a teacher no one respected in a dusty Nevada town, failing and alone. Then a mountain man had walked through her door, humble enough to ask for learning, strong enough to show her a different path. They had found each other across their vast differences, and built something enduring and beautiful. In the end, that was the greatest lesson Hannah had ever learned. that love and respect could transform everything, that two people who valued each other could create a life beyond any solitary dream, and that sometimes the most important teaching happened not in a schoolhouse, but in the quiet moments of a life lived together. Years later, when their grandchildren asked Hannah to tell them stories about the old days, she would always smile and begin the same way. "Once upon a time, I was a teacher no one respected. Then your grandfather walked into my classroom and everything changed." And it had. Everything had changed, transformed by courage and love and mutual respect, by a mountain man willing to learn and a teacher willing to see beyond the surface. Their story had become part of the mountain itself, woven into the fabric of the community they had helped build, a testament to what was possible when two people found each other and chose to grow together. As the years continued to unfold, Hannah and Bridger grew old together in their mountain home, surrounded by children and eventually grandchildren, their love deepening with each passing season. When they finally left this world, it was within days of each other, as if neither could bear to be without the other even in death. But their legacy continued. The mountain school Hannah had started expanded into a full institution that educated generations of children. Bridger's books remained in print, teaching wilderness skills and respect for nature to readers across the country. Their children carried forward the values they had been taught: the importance of education, respect for different ways of knowing, and the transformative power of love. And in Reno, in the old schoolhouse that still stood on the edge of town, there was a small plaque commemorating Hannah Jameson Xerxes, the teacher who had persevered despite disrespect, and who had eventually found her true calling in the mountains, and Bridger Xerxes, the mountain man who had valued learning enough to humbly seek it, and whose example had changed an entire community's attitude toward education. Their story was complete, a love story set against the wild backdrop of Nevada's mountains, a tale of two people who had found each other and built something lasting. From that first November day when Bridger walked into Hannah's classroom to the end of their long lives together, they had loved completely, learned constantly, and created a legacy that would endure far beyond their years. It was a story of respect and transformation, of teaching and learning, of strength and gentleness, of mountains and books and love. It was a story that proved that the most unlikely meetings could lead to the most beautiful endings, and that sometimes the greatest lessons were taught not by books but by life itself, lived with an open heart and a willing spirit. And so their story ended as all the best stories do, with love fulfilled, lessons learned, children raised, and a life well lived together. The mountain man and the teacher, forever intertwined in memory and legacy, their love as enduring as the mountains themselves.